Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded event for GCSE Mathematics Linked Pair Pilot. This is a feedback session for the June 2015 applications papers. To help you get the most out of this feedback, you may want to have the following documents handy, as we will refer to them during the session. In this session, you will receive feedback on national performance of candidates in applications, Units 1 and 2 of the June 2015 examination series. Consider the variation of candidates' performance on different questions, and possible reasons why. Look at the examiner's reports. Address common issues and FAQs. We start by considering what students at foundation tier did well. Generally, these were short one-mark questions, or questions which involved straightforward processes or processes that involved money. Similarly, on H tier, short technique-based questions were well done. Our first example is a good response to question 1 from paper F1. The calculations are fairly well set out and the answer correct. The student has ignored the 1032.66 in the middle of the response, possibly because they realized it was far too large. This is a good response to a QWC. Quality of Written Communication question. The calculation is fairly well set out, and there is a correct written conclusion. The answer could have been improved with a, possibly single-word description of what the £998 and the £1,000 actually were. This is a good response to a question which tests interpretation of a travel graph and knowledge and use of the relationship between speed, distance, and time. This candidate understands the concept of average speed and does not make the common error of writing 2 hours 15 minutes as 2.15. The usual way to answer a question like this is to use a two-way table. In this case, the table would be a 3x2 representing the 3 types of ticket and the 2 types of passengers. This student has not done this, but does provide a clear strategy for solving the problem. It is expected on the higher tier that students should be able to put problems into an algebraic form where appropriate. This is an example of a case where the student has done exactly that. They have then gone on to solve the resulting inequality. This is not such a good response. The candidate has tried to set up an algebraic inequality, but made a mistake in the third line. This was a common error. In summary, candidates tend to do well when they have to answer short, technique-based questions, or when they are on familiar ground with standard tasks appropriate to the tier of entry. At both tiers, problem-solving could be improved by judicious use of vocabulary. We now go on to consider extracts from the principal examiner reports for each paper. We start with paper F1. Here are 2 issues identified on F1. Firstly, some students do not give a definite statement at the conclusion of a QWC starred question. Circling parts of the question is insufficient. Secondly, it would be useful if students were able to get a feel for the size that their answer should be. This can be done either by estimation or by thinking about the plausibility of the answer. In this question, common to both tiers, students had to decide which was the best buy, show their working, and give a definite statement. In this response, the student has certainly done that. This example illustrates the second extract raised from the principal examiner's report. The student did subtract the mileages, many added, but £1,026 should have alerted the student that the answer was wrong. On paper F2, the principal examiner noted that omission of working often resulted in the loss of marks. It is good exam technique to write down calculations before working out on the calculator. This response illustrates the principal examiner's case. 5% of 40 is 2, so it could have been just a miscopy or miskey on the calculator. However, with no expression, such as 400 divided by 100 multiplied by 5, the mark cannot be given. Overall, there were good performances at F tier, especially on the standard, familiar material, for example in the two cases just seen. There are various strategies which can be considered to improve success. One is to always write down calculations before they are done on the calculator. A second is always to ask if the size of the answer is reasonable. Teaching and learning strategies can be put in place to encourage both of these processes. Activity 1 has examples of students' work at F tier. Use the mark scheme to mark them. Make a note of any teaching and learning issues that arise. We now go on to look at some examples from the higher tier papers that illustrate some of the issues identified by them. Starting with paper H1, this screen shows two issues that were regarded as important. The first is that students are faced with carrying out approximations. They should round figures correct to one significant figure. The second is that students need to use the appropriate technical language when comparing statistical distributions. In this exam, a comparison of box plots had to be made. Here are the responses of 3 students which illustrate the first point. The response in the upmost box is a good attempt, but the 12 should be 10 and the 1 should be 0.5. The response in the middle box gets full marks for the figures on the left. It's good to see the proper use of the approximately equals sign. The final response gains no marks, as it is just a fully accurate calculation. This screen shows 2 responses to illustrate the second point made by the principal examiner. Student answers to this type of question have never been good on any of our Edexcel mathematics specifications. The key idea is to use one appropriate measure of location, usually the median, and one measure of dispersion, either the range or the interquartile range. State the values and then make a comparison. In the upper response, the student has confused mean and median and has made no reference to dispersion. They get no marks. The lower response is much better. This student has been taught to use the median and the interquartile range, the abbreviation IQR is acceptable. A comparison is made between the two distributions, and some attempt is made to include the context. Finally, here are 2 points extracted from the Principal Examiner's report for paper H2. Firstly, students on the higher tier in particular should be aiming to cast a problem into a suitable form to solve it. In some cases, this form will necessarily be an algebraic one. In many cases, students are finding this difficult to do. Secondly, more able students should aim to develop processes to solve more complex problems, which may or may not require algebra. Again, in many cases, students are unable to do this. This screen illustrates the first point raised. It shows the responses of 3 students. The upmost response gets no marks. The student has probably translated 1 litre for every 10 miles to 1 T equals 10 M. The middle response gets all 3 marks, although the brackets are superfluous. The lowest box shows a response which gets 1 mark for at least understanding that to work out the number of litres, the number of miles driven, M, has to be divided by 10. It is of particular interest that this student was able to answer the following part of the question, designed to test use of the formula, starting from scratch. This shows a problem that was intended to be accessible on the H tier. It would have been a tough one on F tier. This screen shows a very good response. The calculations have been fairly well set out. It would have been clearer if the student had not written down so many figures, but they were most likely being cautious. The calculations are correct, and an appropriate written statement made. This response is less good. The student sensibly has drawn out the diagrams to help with the calculation. They have used the correct formula for the arc length of a semicircle and then calculated correctly the total curved length. Sadly, they omitted the 2 straight borders, despite the 3 clearly having been shown on their own diagram. Even worse, they did not relate their calculation to the number of edging strips. This student had a bad start. However, they crossed out the incorrect work and started again. However, the arc lengths of the inner and outer semicircles are found incorrectly. This is despite the student writing circumference equals pi d and the 8m and 5m being each described as a radius. In conclusion, candidates who demonstrated good problem-solving skills on this question showed the following. They knew the correct formula for the circumference of a circle. They could adapt it to find the perimeter of the given shape. They could relate the perimeter they found to the constraint. They were able to communicate a decision as a statement. On the other hand, the following can be said for this question about those students who scored few marks. Some students were confused over the use of circle formula, ranging from at the very worst having no idea of any formula, through to confusing the area with the circumference formula, up to misusing the circumference formula. Many candidates showed a lack of care when working out the perimeter of the shape. This could be improved by drawing a sketch of the shape and putting the measurements on, although as we saw, this does not always guarantee success. Activity 2 is a follow-up to the 2 issues in the previous screens. It encourages you to examine the work of some students and to draw conclusions for teaching and learning from them. To summarize, students tended to do better because all papers are calculator-based. There was an absence of explicit checking. Marks could be increased if students checked answers and then looked to see where an error had been made. When solving a multi-step problem, it helps to put in some vocabulary to keep track of what is being worked out. Here are some links if you wish to follow up on the statistics of the papers. Don't forget that Results Plus gives a very comprehensive account of how students performed. This specification runs for another year, with the final exam in November 2016. Finally, please let us know how we did on this presentation. You can do this easily via the online feedback form. Thank you for listening.